Hello and welcome back. This is episode 170 with Joel Hayes and Keegan Taccori. I talk with the guys about their adventure from Alaska to Argentina in their 100% solar-powered electric van. So let's get into it. Joel is the pilot and Keegan is the co-pilot. They are the first team in the world to drive a solar-powered 100% electric camper van from Alaska to Argentina. The adventure is called Route del Sol, and the goal is to make it to the bottom of South America by the summer of 2020. The first part of Route del Sol has taken them through the landscapes of Alaska, the Yukon Territory, and British Columbia. Now they're in part 2 and making their way down the west coast of the United States. You can learn more at routedelsol.com. Joel Hayes and Keegan Taccori, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, mate.
Glad to be here.
Where are you guys from?
Well, I'm from subtropical Australia, a town called Tweed Heads, which is pretty close to the Gold Coast. And if you don't know that, it's pretty close to the major city in Queensland called Brisbane.
And I'm from the Blue Mountains, which is close to Sydney on the east coast of Australia.
How did you guys meet?
I put out a volunteer adventure buddy position on a website called goodwork.ca. It's a Canadian job vacancy website, I guess. And Keegan applied and we had a couple of conversations and then we met in Fairbanks, Alaska at the airport when I picked him up to start the journey.
And then we drove north to the Arctic Circle where we, essentially started.
So what did the ad say?
What did it say? I can't remember, Keegan.
Oh, just who wants to come on a Yahoo adventure from north to south in this spaceship and try and film a documentary and try and start a media production company essentially and try and monetize this project.
Yeah, I think it was mostly based around monetization and marketing. I needed someone to help me with the media side of things of the project. Being a scientist, I guess I know a little bit about it all, but I definitely needed help and I was out of my depth. So I was sort of looking for someone to come in from more of the artistic or marketing side of the project to help it out.
So where did the idea for this project come from? How did it all get hatched and started?
Yeah, so that's, I guess, me. And I get asked this all the time. And it's really hard to give an out-of-the-box answer, but there was no, I guess, one defining moment for this project's beginning or conception. It sort of was a bunch of ideas that built up and sort of combined together over, I'd say, about 4 or 5 years worth of thinking and thought processes. So it all began originally back in, I'd say, the mid-2000, like from 2010 maybe, or a little bit earlier. And I had a GoPro camera and I was watching a lot of YouTube videos and there was this series on there called Brothers on the Run where two famous snowboarders took a trip down the west coast of the Americas from Alaska down to Argentina. And I thought to myself, oh, that sounds like an amazing adventure. I'd want to do that one day. And then over the years, finishing my university degree and becoming an environmentalist, I sort of developed ideas based around sustainability. And I sort of thought, it would be really great to do that trip in the most sustainable way possible. Then the birth of, or the rebirth of electric vehicles came along, and then I thought, what's stopping us from powering these things off of solar power? And I sort of put my mind to it and built a team, and the project was birthed, and now we're here in Seattle and Washington.
The Alaska to Argentina was that was a movie that you mentioned?
It's a TV series called, a YouTube, I guess, vlog series called Brothers on the Run. And it was the Jackson brothers, John and Eric Jackson. They're both from Alaska and they're professional snowboarders for Red Bull and Burton at the time. And that company, I guess, just paid for them to do an adventure from Alaska down to Argentina. They didn't actually make it. One of them got injured pretty badly doing a trick in the mountains somewhere. But yeah, it was an epic adventure and it looked really fun. And I guess that escapism and all of the picturesque places they were visiting really inspired me to want to replicate the journey in my own way.
And lots of people have done this journey before. Yeah. It's called the Pan American Highway, and they say it's the longest connected series of highways in the world. Mm-hmm. And like up in Northern Alaska, we met people on bicycles and other people in vans that are doing the exact same trip. But yeah, I think, I guess that's special about our trip is what Jolie said, what Jolie highlighted, trying to do this on renewable energy in an electric vehicle, which, you know, in the next 10, 15, 20 years is absolutely just going to overtake the market.
Yeah, we hope to see that be commonplace or common practice, you know, having our grids at least not solar powered, but renewably powered, and then maybe carrying our own renewable energy with us everywhere we go. That would be an amazing outcome, or hopefully we inspire people to sort of push for that a little bit more.
Did you think of doing a different route? I mean, any other ideas besides Alaska to Argentina? Did that come into play at all?
Yeah, for me, I mean, an easy option or an easier option would have been to go around the rim of Australia. A lot of people do that. And given Australia is the sunniest continent on the planet, it would have been a whole lot easier and familiar for me to do so. But I guess that sounds like more of a retirement trip to me rather than an adventure in my 20s. I think the Alaska to Argentina sounds a little bit more exciting and a little bit more adventurous. So I'm sort of quite into that at this point in time in my life.
And we've both been living in North America for a little while, and just heading down to, you know, Latin America along the coastline where we can surf and climb and explore these different countries just sounds like an amazing adventure.
You guys are relatively young. Did you just before you did this, were you in university or were you working in jobs before you started this?
I studied a journalism degree in Wollongong in Australia a couple of years ago. Graduated, and then I've just pretty much been on the road ever since, and, you know, was working in South India for a while and was working here in Canada for a little bit. And then Jolie, a little bit different, but... Yeah,
so I'm a little bit older than Keegan, 6 years. It's not too much, but so I've had a little bit more time spare, I guess. But I finished university in 2014, and that's when I moved to Canada and North America. And I've had some exciting roles in Australia before I moved here, and also in Canada while I've lived up in this part of the world before I started this trip. Yeah, so I've sort of been traveling, I guess, too, and after I finished university.
So I want to talk about this van. And first of all, how did you go about finding this? And I guess I'm going to ask two questions here. How did you find the van? But before that, I mean, how much of a process was it to figure out what kind of a vehicle you needed?
Being sort of out of my depth, I guess when you start a project like this and there's no one else doing it, you sort of have to go off of what everybody else is doing. And a lot of people actually convert VW buses into electric vehicles. There's this guy, Jehu Garcia, on YouTube. He actually is quite big in the game, and he works with a company called EV West out of California, Southern California there, and they convert EV buses. So for the longest time I thought, you know what, I'll probably convert a vehicle, because this was my own thought process before I had others join the crew to help me get this project underway. And that was it. And I sort of arrived at a bunch of alternative decisions where I had to decide on whether I was going to use a donor vehicle or whether I was going to use an originally electric vehicle to start the process. So that's sort of what I was thinking before I met a guy named Brett Beelan in Ashland, Oregon, on the west coast here. And his company's called Solar Roller. And I met Brett online as well, and Brett was just absolutely stoked with the idea of the project. At that point in time, the idea had fully come together, and it was me driving from Alaska to Argentina in one of these vehicles. And Brett's an expert engineer who's dedicated his life to solar-powered transportation. So when he heard about this, he thought, I really need to get on board and support this journey. And he did. He invited me to live with him in Ashland, Oregon, and he found a community who knew about all sorts of electric vehicles, and he threw a few options at me, and we both went and checked out the vehicle that we're using currently, which is an International E-Star. We found it in San Rafael, California. It's quite a rare vehicle. There's only 500 of them. In hindsight, I look back and I think, how lucky we are to have the opportunity to own one of these vehicles and to have found one to build the project of. So yeah, it sort of all came about organically like that, but I'd say Brett was the key instigator. He really helped me find the vehicle and make this project happen.
Yeah, it's pretty cool looking until I found you guys on YouTube and I saw that saw the van. I'd never seen one before. I didn't know, where the heck it was from. Where do you then, once you get it from out in California, do you bring it then back to Ashland, Oregon and work on it there?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So me and Brett were in Ashland together, and we were discussing, our way forward. We were looking at a few vehicles, and that sort of was the very beginning of the project. And things just unfolded really rapidly. So I think one day we found this van, and we were like, all right, we got to go check it out. And then we decided pretty much then and there that we were going to buy this vehicle, and it was a great opportunity that we should jump onto. And we threw the money down. We went and checked. We threw the money down before we even bought the van or saw the van, just knowing that we're probably not going to find another opportunity like this, and we don't want it to go to waste. So we bought it before we left Ashland. Then we got a ride to San Rafael or San Francisco with a friend and bought the van, and then we road tripped it back to Ashland, which is probably like a 4-hour, 400-mile journey. It was my first experience in an electric vehicle and everything that comes along with it, which was like range anxiety and all of that sort of stuff. And we were using charging stations at the time. So I sort of look back on that now and I sort of laugh, because the ability to use charging stations all the time is actually super free and enjoyable almost in comparison to driving on solar power, because of the time and length it takes for us to charge and stuff like that. But yeah, we road tripped it back to Ashland, and we started working on the project there.
And how long did it take to get it ready for you guys to go?
Yeah, so that's the actual really amazing thing about this project. It probably could have taken a whole lot longer. It could have been maybe a year or 6 month to a year project, but we had to beat summer in Alaska. We wanted to get up to Alaska before the summer was out, and I put that pressure on Brett and the team that helped me build it and myself, and we did it in 2 months. It was really amazing. We all banded together, and people just showed up out of nowhere. It was kind of like the universe was answering calls every turn we made, and people would just turn up and start picking up tools and helping out. And, engineers would jump on board, and we managed to really get this project moving really quickly.
When you see the van, I guess it looks like a pretty normal van in terms of the solar setup. You have a rack of solar, but then when you guys are stopped, you have the ability to like expand the whole solar setup and get a heck of a lot more solar arrays pointed towards the sun. Explain what kind of a setup that you have.
Pretty much exactly what you described. We have maybe a third of the panels on the roof that is always deployed. So, while we're driving, we can actually, continue to charge our secondary battery pack that we have, as well as on the very back side of the vehicle. And then when we stop, we can deploy underneath on a series of rollers. It rolls out on both sides of the vehicle. We have 7,000 watts of solar capacity on our roof, plus on the back, we have 2 satellite panels. And then so once it's essentially like 3 separate panels. So the 2 that sit underneath the main panel that roll out on either side, and then we can lift the entire array up through a series of pulleys and some winches that are on the side of our van. And then the entire thing can lift up to around a 45-degree angle, and that allows us to track. So we can move the vehicle in the direction of the sun, and that it just maximizes our efficiency.
Yeah, so you guys have on your roof, I'm just kind of guessing at the size here. I'll call it a tray. So you have like a tray that's filled with panels, and one of those is maybe like 5 feet by 10 feet or 5 feet by 12 feet. And then you have the 2 additional ones that slide out. So you have this, when you're fully deployed, you have this thing that's like 15 feet by 12 feet or something like that. It's this massive array that you have. Am I close to the size?
Yeah, it's pretty close. 14 feet wide and 17 or 18 feet long, which is massive when you think about it. And it is. When it's deployed, it's absolutely incredible. I call it an eyesore, but I think really people are just stoked on how much solar Brett at Solar Roller and me managed to fit up on top of the roof. It's absolutely incredible. And then to add the extra satellite panels on the back of the van that we pull out and deploy as well, that's an extra 1,000 watt that we can deploy if we have the space or time to do so. So, yeah, an astronomical amount of solar power on top of the vehicle.
Do you guys have a daily routine that you fall into, like you so at a certain time of the day that you have to stop and deploy to recharge?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people ask us that. Do you drive in the night time so that during the daytime you can charge and that kind of thing? At the moment, we're just cruising, right? Like this entire adventure will probably, when we don't actually know, but will probably take around 18 months to 2 years. So we're just very much enjoying the sights and the adventure along the way. So we will charge for a certain couple of days, potentially. Can be up to, up in northern Alaska, for instance, it took us, like 2 weeks, in northern Canada, because the sun crests quite low throughout the sky. Here today, the last 2 days here in Washington, it took us 2 days, and we got almost like three quarters of a pack worth of batteries. What did we get?
So over 2 days of charging, we got something like nearly 80 kilowatt or at least 70 kilowatt hours of energy, which is it's about 100 miles worth of driving, maybe a little bit more than 100 miles worth of driving.
Which is absolutely amazing. And then now we are in Seattle, so we've driven a few miles, and we're here for the day to do some things. Then we're heading just down to Tacoma. We're going to be there for another week, visiting a friend, and we're attending a conference for the next 3 days. It's a green transportation conference, and the vehicle will be on display. And then after that, we'll be on the coast, and then we'll probably just hang on the beach until our batteries are fully charged, check out the surf, and then if the surf's really good, 100 miles south, then we'll drive 100 miles south and then sit there for another couple of days and charge.
I think like the best way to answer your question, Paul, is we've both, myself, I'm speaking from my perspective, is I've sort of been thinking about when are we going to get into this routine where we're super productive and we have this daily schedule, like I'm sure you can understand for yourself producing this podcast or any other things that you do, you have to sort of have a schedule so that you can be productive when you're sort of doing your own thing. But I think on this project, we don't really have the opportunity to do that. Every day looks different. One day we're attending a conference, the next day we're adventuring a new town and checking out the sites and getting footage for our YouTube series. Next day we're on the phone to potential sponsors, or we're running a campaign of sorts online to raise funds to help us continue on our journey. Yeah, all sorts of things just constantly make our day very broken up and different every day. It's very spontaneous, and we sort of want to keep it that way. But yeah, there's not really any one particular day that our day looks like.
And lots of editing as well, as I'm sure you can relate to. And at the moment, I think a lot of our time is invested into trying to find funding for this trip, and applying for grants and applications and potential sponsorship and things like that. And unfortunately, we haven't been too successful in that regard. So we are spending a lot of our time looking for ways to make this financially sustainable.
Sure. I guess you want to keep it spontaneous, like you say. Otherwise, it'll seem too much like going to the office every day.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, potentially we need to get into a bit of a routine, at least for a while, so that we can sort out this financial aspect of the journey, because the way we're doing it currently is financially unsustainable. But definitely want to keep it spontaneous and enjoyable, and like any other journey that you would take in a overlanding experience.
How has the van been holding up for you? Any serious mechanical problems?
None so far, knocking on wood. Actually, I think about that a lot, and a lot of people say, oh, what would you do, because the vehicle is quite different to the average overlanding vehicle? What would you do if the vehicle broke down on the side of the road? Do you have to know how to fix it? All that sort of question, all those sorts of questions. And the best answer is it's an electric vehicle, and electric vehicles are quite simple. We do have a community of people who know the vehicle that we're driving in particular very well. And myself, I've also had quite a crash course in how this vehicle works too. So I generally find a way to weed out the problem and find a solution. But we haven't run into any huge solutions. We haven't had like burnt out batteries yet. We haven't had motor issues or transmission issues. So luckily, we haven't run into those yet. If we do, then I guess we'll just find a solution. And I've great faith in our ability to deal with those problems when they do arise.
So you're not using charging stations. You're just 100% from the solar. Once you get charged up, what's the maximum speed that you guys are able to travel at?
The idea of this trip is to do the entire journey on renewable energy. When we were in British Columbia, for instance, and in the Yukon, we were using solar in between where we couldn't find charging station was supported by renewable energy. So, for instance, in British Columbia, it's something like 95 or 96% of the electricity or the energy that's generated in that province comes from hydroelectricity or is renewable. So hydro as well as wind stations. And so up there, as well as because it is faster when we use the charging stations, it will take about 8 hours to actually charge the vehicle. So obviously we can just plug it in overnight and the next morning we have full battery. We can continue onwards. But now that we've crossed the border, we're back into the US, the grids are different now, and it's not as easy to actually understand exactly where that energy is coming from, and we can't be 100% sure that, yes, this is 100% renewable or 95% or whatever it might be. So yes, we are, and pretty much henceforth onwards, we will be using the solar.
Just to clarify, there are regions up in British Columbia and the Yukon that are 100% renewable, but like any grid, any alternate currenting grid, they bounce energy around. And we were sourcing out locations where we were most likely to get 100% renewable energy to charge up our van off of the hydro grid. But we did also use a lot of solar power up there as well. And since we've crossed the border, we've only used 100% solar power. In Alaska, we used 100% solar power to get down to a certain area. And then there was one hiccup where we did have to plug into a very unsustainable grid to get over the border because our visas were running out and we didn't want to overstay them in the US and jeopardize our ability to cross the border back in the lower 48. So we're going to offset that one particular charge and any other potential charges that we've used non-sustainable sources of energy.
So, and just to answer that last part of the question, our top speed is 55 miles per hour.
How did you find Alaska? What's it like up there?
Absolutely incredible. I mean, they call it the last frontier, and I think it lives up to its name. There's open, vast spaces of nothing but everything all in one, if that makes any sense to you. We were in the tundras and the Arctic plains and the permafrost areas, and there's all sorts of crazy vegetation and animals, and the people up there are lovely and different, and I mean that's why we travel, to experience difference in culture and all that sort of stuff too. So the mountains, the plains, the animals, the streams, it was absolutely incredible.
And the reception has been amazing. The people up there have just, as well as northern Canada and all throughout Canada, have just been ridiculously just stoked with the project and really happy for what we're doing, and just they think that we're crazy trying to take this thing all the way down to the southernmost tip of South America, which, especially for Alaskans, is, well, probably the furthest place away from them.
Yeah, it is kind of thing. We kind of do a semicircle around the Earth.
Yeah.
Has your interaction with people been mostly positive, or have you had, because I can't imagine anybody would be a naysayer about this, because it's such a cool project. You would want to root for your success, but have you had any people that have been on the naysayer side?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's such a minuscule, like a few percent of the people that we actually meet, and most of them, pretty much all of the naysayers, I guess, have been online. So just classic YouTube comments and those kind of things on our, because we have a vlog series on Route del Sol on our YouTube channel. And, you know, we have people that think the Earth is flat, like the Flat Earth Society, those kind of people that just love to just hate on the idea that, you know, they think that climate change is not a, you know, threatening force in our society at the moment. And we just get random comments here and there about that kind of thing. But for the most part, yeah, it's been absolutely positive.
There's like the odd person here and there in real life too that for whatever reason they, I don't know, feel a certain way about the project. But most people are less vocal when they're in that sort of state of mind, and they sort of just enjoy the project from their perspective for whatever it is and then walk away. But yeah, most people are just like, what is this thing? And we explain it to them, and then they're completely stoked and they walk away with a big smile on their face. And for us, that's brilliant. We think like that's exactly what we want to do. We want to try and inspire people and have people walk away with us full of energy and excited about the future and maybe their potential to help whatever that is whatever that future might look like from their perspective or however they can help out.
Are you guys sticking mostly to the Pan American Highway, or are you driving off course to go in other directions to see sights and have fun? And how's that working for you?
We're zigzagging all over the place. I think using Pan America Highway is just almost a familiarity. To say that literally means that we're driving from Alaska, the most northern point of the Americas, to Argentina, the most southern point of the Americas. But yeah, the Pan America Highway, although we've been on parts of it, we're definitely not following the exact route to a T. We bounce around all the time. Someone says, oh, come and visit us at this conference out here and present for us. So we drive off of course, and often spontaneously we'll find things that we want to go visit. So we'll go and visit them. Just like any overlanding experience, I'm pretty sure that's what people do through word of mouth or any other avenue of finding out information about a place, just to go and check something out. We definitely veer off course.
And I think for the most part, like Jolly is obsessed with surfing, I'm obsessed with rock climbing, and we both really like each other's sports as well. So for the most part, we'll try and stick towards the coast with a few national parks we'll duck into and a few mountainous regions. And I think there's a couple of areas throughout Mexico along the coast and along the coast of Central America that are potentially a little bit more of a dangerous route to take, so we might have to duck inland of those places. But it's one of those things we just take each day as it comes and figure it out on the way.
When you drove through Canada, how was that, especially the Yukon territory? How was that, and how did that compare to Alaska?
I think they're quite similar. I mean, the Yukon and Alaska, both very picturesque and beautiful places, and I think the kind of people that exist on both sides of the border there are very similar. They're probably more similar than each other would know. Living in rural, remote parts of the planet, I think, brings out similarities in people's communities and the way that people act and stuff like that. So as far as people go, very similar, very, very lovely, very inviting, very open people, very strange at times in comparison to people who dwell in cities and more populated areas of the planet, which is great. We love that. And the scenery and the beauty is very similar as well. Mountain ranges and glaciers and rivers and streams and animals and stuff like that. Nature sort of doesn't know borders. So I think, yeah, that's a perfect way to put it. They're both very beautiful places.
Did any of your driving, was it during the winter time, or are you trying to do this entire trip so you're never really in super cold weather?
We're trying.
We're trying. We literally being chased by the winter up north. I'd never seen a true autumn before, essentially. The leaves don't really change colour where I'm from in fall time in Australia. And so it was just absolutely gorgeous to kind of, for about 2.5 months when we were driving from Alaska down to Vancouver, we were just being chased by the fall and, like I said, the winter, and it caught up with us a couple of times. We got snowed on a couple of times. We got stuck. You know, I said it took 2 weeks to charge up north, and that was because it snowed a couple of times during that, and we were clearing snow off our solar panels. And, you know, the van is insulated, but we don't have the best heating source, which isn't an issue anymore because obviously around the equator it's going to be quite warm, and we'll have to deal with that again once we get down south. But we're trying to time it so that we can do the entire thing in summer, and because the weather does play a major role in our solar adventure.
Yeah. Also, I think in some parts being in the summer is probably not the best idea. Like, for example, around the equator in the tropics, the summertime is usually a wet season, which is what we experience a lot in Australia, or especially where I'm from. So at certain times you kind of want to avoid places in the summer and sort of drive in the wintertime, because it's not cold around the equator in winter, but there's less rain and less cloud and less precipitation. So it does take a lot of planning and understanding of particular hydrological systems within certain regions. And I guess that's where my background comes in, and I sort of plan out that or study things. When I was looking at going to Alaska, for example, I had to pull up the climate data and have a look at if it was going to even be possible for us to be up there in August at the Arctic Circle and all that sort of stuff. So we really are kind of like charting and plotting and directing on nature and also what we want to see and the people we want to visit and all that sort of stuff too. But yeah, there's a lot of natural aspects that we have to keep in mind.
What has been the biggest thing that you've underestimated so far about the adventure?
For me, the biggest thing would be the sheer amount of energy it takes to interact with everybody who is excited about the project. I'm absolutely stoked and just excited about how many people are excited about the project. But this is our 24/7 reality. And every single day we speak to people and we talk to people about the project. And at times you sort of want to go off into your own little space and re-energize and recoup. And it's not always possible to do that. And you have to sort of live up to the excitement of the project. So for me, it was just sort of underestimating the amount of energy it would take to interact with human beings on the project.
I guess for me, it'd be just the amount of energy it actually requires to move a vehicle. And, you know, we spend, like I said, 2 or 3 days sitting there charging with the panels, waiting to charge our batteries completely. And then we drive 200 miles, which is a fair distance. But also if you compare that to an ICE vehicle, internal combustion engine, you get a much more range, working different amounts of energy, and just kind of putting that in perspective with, you know, cooking our food and putting our lights on in the night and all those kind of things. I'm truly, through Joel specifically, becoming to really understand what energy is and how we use it within our society. And I guess it's really daunting and on me now how our society has used and abused it for so long. And I guess that's one of the things we're trying to highlight through this journey and through the documentary that we're producing as well. So yeah, I've really underestimated energy, to be honest.
I think a lot of humans are entitled, and I love that answer, Keegan. I've never sort of heard you say that before. But yeah, a lot of humans are very entitled to the energy that they have, and without even understanding what that is, you know, getting in your vehicle and putting your foot down on an accelerator pedal is an absolutely a beautiful thing that our society has created for us. But we're all almost entitled to that now, and that entitlement, I think, breeds a lot of problems in our world, and just bringing people's awareness towards that. What kind of energy does it take to move a massive structure, a vehicle, a car, forwards to get you from one place to another? And how does that compare to other parts of your life? For example, like having a light on, which is minuscule in comparison to the energy it takes to move a vehicle around. And definitely that's exactly what we want to highlight and want people to understand through this project.
What have been your best moments so far?
Yeah, my favorite moment was actually, and I don't know, it sounds funny to say it, but driving the van to Bellingham and getting on a ferry from Bellingham and going all the way up to Haynes, Alaska, through the Inside Passage. I love the ocean and I love spending time on the water, and I plan to spend some of my life actually doing that, traveling the world by sea. But yeah, definitely being on that boat and driving through all the fjords and the glaciers, touching the ocean and the animals and the eagles and the birds and the whales. And yeah, it was just such a magical part of the trip. But also, yeah, just driving through the Northern Rocky Mountains, it was quite beautiful.
My favorite part of the trip, probably the people. Being able to be connected through this vehicle to some of the people that we've met along the way. And I guess through my other travels, you meet people in different capacities, and this is one of the most serious ones where I've been at. People have just come out of the waterworks. People have met us online and have reached out to us, and we've gone to stay with them, and they've just like opened up their hearts and their homes to us and their families as well. And you know, we just spent a couple of days in Bothell in Seattle with this incredible family that just pretty much allowed us. They reached out to us online and they allowed us to park at their house for 2 or 3 days, and we met their entire community, and the entire community is quite close knit, and we had a lot of amazing conversations, a lot of amazing food, and it was absolutely exceptional. And we had the same experience in Vancouver as well with a family friend of ours, or mine, who I've known for a couple of years now, but they've just allowed us to kind of use their home and hang around there and use showers and things like that, hang out with the family. And that's just been amazing, been opening ourselves up like that to other people and just allowing people to help us out, because I think sometimes, especially potentially as males as well, you know, sometimes you're like, no, we're individuals, we can do this by ourselves, we don't need anyone's help. But it's absolutely okay to ask for help and to accept help as well. And it's a really beautiful thing. Like, I love helping people and people love helping us. And I think it's been really amazing to be able to allow that for our journey.
That's very cool. I'm curious to see what will happen when you get down to the Spanish-speaking countries, and if you'll have the same amount of interest from people just due to the language barrier.
I haven't traveled through that area very much, if at all, but I've spoken to lots of friends and even family that have, and they've given me some sort of inside scoop, and it sounds like it's going to be a pretty incredible place, coupled with some dangerous locations and stuff like that too. But apparently, the people down there are very open and inviting and happy, and they have this joy to life that I'm really looking forward to experiencing, and very open to inviting people into their lives as well and showing them their way of life in comparison to our way of life. And like I said earlier, it's definitely one of the reasons why I travel, is to experience difference in culture and the way people do things, and I'm really looking forward to it. Regardless of whether I feel the same way, I'm sure there's going to be positives and negatives, but regardless of whether I feel the same way about that in comparison to, say, North American culture, I'm really looking forward to it.
And you mentioned about the language barrier. I mean, Jolie can get by in French, I can get by in Portuguese, and having that kind of Latin base will really help with our Spanish. Jolie studied Spanish for a couple of years at university. I guess it was a couple of years ago now, and I've traveled throughout Spain before, and my Spanish is extremely average, but after 18 months, without a doubt, we're going to be getting pretty well versed in the language, but that is absolutely a big goal of ours, to truly have a proper grasp of the language so that we can do these countries justice and be able to give the proper reception to the people that we meet.
I think learning a language when you visit a country is almost essential to immerse yourself in the culture and to experience it as fully as you possibly can. So, like Keegan said, one of our big goals is to learn the language and to experience it, and also have people experience us in our best abilities as well.
How did you guys come to speak a little bit of French and a little bit of Portuguese?
I lived in French Canada for a little while. I was one of my ex-girlfriends is French, so I learned it over 2 years, and I've worked in French in the language. I've worked as a professional in those languages, so that's how I learnt it. And Keegan, Portuguese.
Yeah, I used to study in a little city called Coimbra in Portugal, and just lived with a bunch of Brazilians. So learnt a lot about Brazilian culture, probably more about Brazilian culture than I did about Portugal itself. And then I've just been traveling for on and off 5 or 6 years now, and you meet a lot of people on the road and you get to practice those languages continually. And essentially.
It really doesn't take long, if I'm honest, Paul, and especially if you have a brain for it. And it sounds like Keegan and I can speak for myself. I really enjoy language, and I enjoy what it does for you and your experience in traveling. So I really focus and put a lot of attention into learning languages. Within, I'd say, 6 months of studying French and being sort of somewhat immersed in that culture, it became easier and easier every day. I'm not saying it's not challenging, because it definitely isn't. There's times where you're like, what am I doing, and why am I putting my brain through so much stress? Because learning a language is very difficult. But after 6 months, you surprise yourself, and you sort of look back in hindsight one day and you go, wow, like 6 months ago I knew nothing, and now I'm talking to someone about climate change in another language, and it feels beautiful and exciting, and it's a great thing. And
just being 100% immersed. I studied Italian, I remember, a couple of years ago at university, and I just absolutely struggled to kind of find relevance in my everyday life back in Australia. And then a couple of years ago, I was in Italy for about a month, and I was in these small communities where a lot of these people were pretty much everyone was my family. And my father was there, and he speaks fluent Italian, and he was just speaking all the time, and I was just listening. And by the end of the month, I could kind of communicate and get by, and it felt amazing. And I didn't remember anything from university a few years earlier. So just that full-blown immersive experience, I personally feel really, really helps for me, and that's essentially all the motivation I need, and that's exactly what we're going to get throughout this trip. Obviously, with each other, we'll be speaking Australian, but to everyone we meet, we'll be mostly Spanish, and probably a lot of Europeans we'll see on the road, and Americans and things like that, and Canadians will be speaking English too, but for the most part, we'll be Spanish.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. We have respite. We're two Australians living in a van, so we kind of get each other on that level. That's one of the things that when I was immersed in French culture, I really missed and I felt like I could have used, because it actually gives your brain a rest and you get to just be familiar again. And we have that. So if any time we feel overwhelmed, we just go back into our van and we start using some weird slang and terms that we have in Australia and colloquial terms, and we can feel comfortable again and then go back out and be Latin Americans.
I'm sure you guys will do fine. I've got plenty of confidence in you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Hey, if you guys were going to start this all over again, is there anything that you would do differently?
Probably leave at the beginning of summer in Alaska rather than right at the end. Jolie?
That's about it. That's probably the only thing that I would do differently, because that was a huge, huge thorn in our side when we were coming down from Alaska. We probably wouldn't have been as rushed. Also, I think having visas sorted out a little bit earlier, like US visas, so we didn't have to have this pressure of leaving a country on time and stuff like that. So that would have been cool too. But yeah, definitely leaving from Alaska in the summertime, at the start of summertime, would have been ideal. But other than that, I think it's just been an amazing adventure. It's been really cool.
So you mentioned earlier that you guys are still trying to earn some money or through sponsorships and so on. And I saw that you'd run a Kickstarter campaign. I don't know what the success of that was, but I did see that one of the levels of sponsorship was somebody gets to spend 2 weeks in the van with you guys. And I thought, wow, that's pretty crazy. Did that ever happen?
Someone bought it. It was a close friend of mine, and we're going to discuss when they're going to come to visit. But yeah, it will happen. And that's the other thing. It was a close friend who bought it, so no stress or pressure in that regard.
And just an incredible gift from that person's part. She actually works in the mining industry back at home, and I think there was just like a slight amount of guilt or whatever from working in that industry, and she just loves what we're doing, and she just has absolute full-blown support. So it was pretty funny when we found out that had happened, and we gave her a call and we were speaking on the phone, and she was just so incredibly stoked, and she was telling us all about it, like her work and things like that. And
she sort of said, "Oh, is it okay if you receive my dirty money?" But it was kind of like her offsetting, I guess. So yeah, we're kind of benefiting from her offsetting program, I guess.
and we were really successful with our Kickstarter campaign. We had a very ambitious target of $10,000 US to generate within the 30 days that we ran the Kickstarter. We'd never run a campaign like that before. I've done bouts of charity fundraising in the past, but nothing on that level. And we were really, really successful. One of the main things that money goes towards is helping us to update our equipment with the documentary that we're producing. So we set aside a little bit of money for that, as well as some maintenance things that have come up with the van that we've needed to fix. We recently painted and bought a decal for the side of our van, so a little bit of advertising and food and things like that on the road. Like our pretty much our biggest overhead at the moment is food. But that money is substantial, but also for two blokes living in a van for a couple of years and trying to reach the full extent, the full capacity of this project, we are still very much looking for, yes, like I was mentioning before, sponsorship or some type of
partnership, I think. Yeah, some sort of partnership that we can both benefit from in some way or another from that partnership or relationship that we develop with a company or an individual who might need our services and we need their services.
And it's kind of a bit of a rainy day fund if something major was to happen. And so at the moment, like I mentioned, our biggest overhead costs, we spend about $100 per week between the two of us on food. That's our biggest overhead costs. So if we were able to, in some capacity, bring in revenue at $400 a month, that can be enough for us to survive off, for us to eat, and then after that, and do our job. Yeah, not have to stress about that, not have to worry about that.
Tell me a little bit about this documentary.
Yeah, the documentary, it's called Surface Area. That's our working title, and it's really hard to define exactly what that is, but it's going to be a visual experience and a storytelling experience, and it will highlight humans and the way that they use their surface area. So our van, for example, has a large surface area of solar panels, which help us to move our vehicle forward. So the whole documentary is kind of like a metaphor and a story based around that beginning process of increasing our surface area so that we can move this vehicle from one place to another. And I think in metaphorical terms, a lot of humans do that. They use the surface area of their local town, or large corporations use surface areas of the planet to produce revenue, and we just really want to investigate that, especially within the areas that we visit and travel through during this trip, during this journey.
And one of the most powerful things that moves people and pretty much generates change is storytelling, and we're trying to highlight that in a emotive and artistic way through a cinematic experience for this documentary, so that we can really try and motivate people and generate some form of change or some form of motivation for people to actually want to go out there and research more and learn more about their own individual impact, or their company's impact, or their government's impact on the environment around us.
A lot of my viewpoint comes from human consciousness, and I think that's sort of loosely based around human entitlement and stuff like that. If we can inspire people to have some more critical process in their thoughts, in their every day-to-day thought process, through some sort of emotive or artistic experience or some sort of consciousness awakening, I think we'll be doing our job correctly. And that doesn't always have to be super artistic or super out there. It can be just a day-to-day observation that people look at it from a different angle that we're presenting, and they go, whoa, I never really thought about it in that way. And that's what we hope this documentary will be, and also any other media that we produce will do. Like a fun aspect, for example, our YouTube channel is quite fun and light and entertaining, and it gives people who wouldn't normally have access to this sustainable way of life access to it, and it helps them to see that being sustainable and in your every day-to-day life doesn't have to be boring and energy draining. It can be fun and exciting, and it can really be something different to what maybe you might have otherwise imagined.
Is your plan to release the documentary after this trip is over, or before it's over?
Definitely after, yeah. There's a lot of work. I mean, it's the first media project of this size that either of us have worked on, and both of us aren't documentary filmmakers yet. But we're venturing down that avenue, and it's a lot of work, and yeah, we think it'll come out afterwards. We'll have to sort of pull up somewhere after the journey and do post-production for the documentary, and then also move into the next phase of release and touring the documentary, and then also distribution deals and stuff like that. So yeah, it will be released afterwards.
What are you guys looking forward to most on the road ahead?
Definitely the surf, the warm weather, and the cheap food in comparison to the US. So the Baja California coastline, I think we very much have that in our sights at the moment. Like, we're so excited for, California, even the rest of Oregon and Washington, but Mexico being in Latino culture and Mexican culture, and very excited for that.
The Baja coastline is a huge, I guess, surfing idealism in surfing culture, and me being from a very rich surfing culture, I'm really looking forward to having those open beach breaks to myself, endless amounts of sun and heat for us and our van, and then also just the Latin culture and the food. I mean, what's not to look forward to? That sounds like an amazing experience.
I'm excited not to have to wear shoes or a shirt for probably 12 months straight, to be honest.
Fish tacos.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, both of us are vegan, but I think we can break that dietary restriction for a bit of cultural experience down there. I think fish tacos are a very huge part of that particular region of Mexico. So I think we'll have to break it at least once or twice for a good old Baja fish taco.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, where do you want to send people to learn more about your adventure?
Our YouTube channel is probably the best. Route del Sol, if you search for that. Also our Instagram, through our Instagram stories, you can see day-to-day life here in the van and the antics that we get up to, and also quite a nice looking Instagram feed. As well as we have a Facebook page where we're always trying to post stories and, updates and things like that, and trying to get people involved on the conversation. And of course, we have a website, rootdelsol.com, where you can find technical information and that kind of thing as well.
Do you have a donations page if people want to send you a donation?
Yeah, definitely. We have a support us tab on our website. Absolutely, that any form of funding or any form of partnerships that someone might potentially want to get involved with us dramatically helps us. And we have things that we can offer other people as well in terms of partnership and things like that. But yeah, just off the side, donations from really generous and kind people out there. They can find that on our website, and there's a PayPal link, or they can just email us, and we can we can sort something out through that way.
Okay, Joel Hayes, Keegan Taccori, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm super excited about this adventure. I'm going to be following it along to see how it unfolds. And hey, stay safe out there, and good luck to you guys.
Thanks, mate. Thanks,
Paul. Yeah, thanks for having us on. It was a pleasure to be here.
Lots of fun.
Thank you for listening. This episode was recorded on May 20th, 2019. If you want to get in touch, you can send me an email at paul@thepursuitzone.com. You can also leave a voice message at speakpipe.com/thepursuitzone. Be sure to subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're using, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Like the show on Facebook. And if you can, leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify. For the show notes and more great adventure travel podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.